Hey everybody, I'm Yvonne Williams with Back to Earth Creations, and in this video I want to show y'all how I'm going to make some leather armor. So here you can see I have drafted out on my mannequin, sorry for the high-pitched squeak that she makes when I turn her, but I have it drafted out in just some foam. Like this is like 2 and 3 millimeter craft foam that I got from like Hobby Lobby or somewhere, but I've got it all drafted out. And I'm pinning it to my foam mannequin. This is the way that both of the shoulders are going to be, but to save on the foam, I only really like fleshed it out on one side. But let's go ahead and get started with... Okay guys, so I got the pattern finished out the rest of the way, and I actually went ahead and wrote on my pieces, front cut 1. Now I also used this front plate is the exact same shape as this back plate. So I actually went ahead and wrote back cut 1 and cut down middle on dotted line. So what I'm going to be doing is after I take it off the mannequin, I'm going to be folding it in half and then using that guideline to do some dots down. That way, if I can have my pattern use up as little foam as possible, that's really going to help me, not just in storing it, but also in using the other pattern pieces for whatever. So here I have shoulder 1, cut 2 on a mirror, and that way it's flipped. And then shoulders 2 and 3, I have cut 4 by like a 2x2 mirror, so I've got 2 going one way and then 2 going the other way. And that way, again, that frees me up this shoulder piece down here and this shoulder piece over here and the back panel to be able to use for maybe morphing out into a different template, like making modifications on it or changing it or doing however that way. So I'm going to go ahead and take the pins out, and then we're going to get this transferred over onto some leather. To do that, I'm just going to be putting the pattern piece down and tracing around it on the leather with a scratch awl, and then cutting it out with either a box knife, just like this one here with a very sharp razor, or with leather shears that are also quite sharp. Just whichever you prefer. Use whichever tool you are most comfortable and competent with. So whatever that is, but if you feel, if you're quite good at using it, you're less likely to cut your fingers off, and you need those for future projects. So we'll go ahead and get started on that, and then I'll meet you all right back here for the next step. Okay, so here I have cut out and beveled the edges and cased my leather. I very lightly cased it. And what I mean by that is I filled up my sink with like lukewarm water and just dunked it until it all kind of became this dark color. I want, whenever I'm cutting and tooling on my leather, to be able to spritz it, and it gets very readily absorbed back in. See how that's kind of drinking it up? It takes a second. Like you can see, it's getting smaller and smaller. I want my leather to still be just a little thirsty. And you can see it's still just slurping it in. And you can spread it across the surface and just let it get drunk in even faster. But I want it to still be a little thirsty. I don't want my leather to be so saturated that it just puddles on the top. I want it to be just damp. And so now I'm going to come through with my wing divider, and for this design I'm working at about 3/4 of an inch with my wing divider. And also, just as a note, it was recommended to me by some friends here on YouTube to go ahead and cut this part that's going to be sitting next to the neck in a little deeper. And I think that was really good advice, so thank you. Because you know, whenever I'm building costumes on myself or on dress form, I don't necessarily take into account folks who have thicker necks or like big trapezius muscles, but I think this will lend itself to the overall comfort of the piece. But I'm just going to come through with my wing divider, and whenever I start over here, let me zoom in for you so you can see what I'm doing. I don't want to start all the way at the edge and do a line. I want to come in about equidistant. There we go. That way, as I mark this edge out, it's just going to be a nice border. And again, you'll see I don't pull it all the way down. This way, whenever I turn the piece I'm marking on, I still have a nice clean border without any line across it. And I just do my best to try to keep it nice and equal as I come around. I'm giving myself a wider border on this one than what I typically do because I'm going to be placing rivets around the edge, and I think this will be a nice frame for that. But I'm going to go through and cut or mark each of the pieces like this while they're still nice and damp. Then I'm going to come through with my swivel knife. I really like this one for doing bold, deep lines. Though for most of my other work, I will use like an angled tip. But I have a strop here, which is just, I mean, I haven't backed it with a cardboard or anything. It's just a piece of scrap leather with some jeweler's rouge impregnated into it. And I'm just going to come through and just sharpen up my tip on there. You see a little bit of the jeweler's rouge came up, but keep it nice and sharp, nice and clean. And then I'm going to go through and placing my swivel blade. You could use a craft knife or whatever you like for this as well. And then I'm just going to cut myself a nice deep line. Sorry for the traffic noises outside. And then I place it. And I prefer to work where I'm pulling the swivel knife towards me. Makes me feel like I have a little bit more control. And what I really like about this swivel knife is you can keep continuous pressure by pushing down on the top, either with your first or middle finger. I don't know if you can tell, but my middle finger, my knuckle is quite swollen still from where I hurt myself. I try to make it sound all cool, like, oh, it's an injury. It's like, no, my hand got stuck in the bathroom door handle of a stall. And I like hurt it really bad. So I'm a klutz and a dork. So there's that. But what's more important than proper form is that you feel comfortable and competent in what you're doing. I think that's the best advice that I could have ever gotten, is that, you know, it's not about doing it right, it's about doing it well. And whatever it takes for you to be able to do it well to get the result that you want. Now, that doesn't mean don't try new things and don't try, you know, how other people recommend it. Because you never know, it might work way better than what you thought doing it a different way. But it's, your comfort is more important than someone else's perspective of what they think you ought to be doing on a project. So yeah, so I'm going to go through, I'm going to get a little bit more footage of me doing this. And then I'll meet you guys back here to start doing the tooling. Okay, so here you can see I messed up a little bit. I deviated pretty far from my guideline. Fortunately, it was on the inside and not too far out. So I'm going to show you guys how I would fix this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to cut on the proper guideline. And I'm going to finish off this curve here. So now this piece is completely ready. And then I'm going to bring over, I have, oh, it's quite heavy, but I have, this is called a poundo board. There'll be links to all the tools and materials used down below. I'm going to zoom out so you guys can see. And then I have this like 1.5 to 2-inch thick granite slab. You could also use a piece of like, whenever they do the sink cutouts on a countertop, one of those works phenomenally. But this is a surface that I like to use whenever I am tooling leather. And also, let me reposition the camera so that I don't keep hitting my tripod. Okay, so I've got lots of clearance space to be able to swing my hammer around. Speaking of which, what on earth did I do with that? There it is. Okie dokie. So I have a rawhide head mallet. You could use a poly mallet or just whatever you have. I like something solid that's not going to have too much bounce to it. And then I'm also going to be using, this is a textured bevel tool. Whenever I mess up and I have a cut like that, I'll typically switch the project to a texture because it hides it better. But honestly, I just like the way the textured ones look anyhow. So I'm going to place this up against the line that I do want. And then I'm going to kind of walk it. If you're beginning out, you can just hit, lift it, and see kind of how it bit in right there. You can then lift it and kind of move it half the width of itself over. And then lift and place. But the better you get at it, the more you'll be able to kind of walk it. And so let me zoom in just a little bit more. So hopefully this will capture what we're doing. And as you tap it, it jumps just a little. And kind of moves along the length. And so you can see right there where they were pretty close to each other, it blended it out like completely. So you can see that's the technique that you'll build up to just get to where you're walking it. But I'm going to go back here and I'm going to go over again, kind of not standing up on the tip of the tool, but leaning it down a little bit more. That way more of the tool makes contact with the leather. And just try to blend it out even further. And I think for this one, I'm going to have to use a secondary tool. Fortunately, I was kind of planning that anyways. But here I have one of my favorite backgrounding tools. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to angle it into our beveling that we just did. But not completely flat, but at a little bit of an angle. So, and also I'm trying to make sure that I don't exceed onto this border here. And I'm just going to place it and tap. Place it and tap. And this is one that I don't like walking it because I feel like it muddies up the pattern. I like to lift it and place it with just a little bit of overlap. Just like that. You can still see a little bit of that line. So I'm just going to place it and maybe do it a little heavier and a little darker. You can see that line. I mean, if you're looking real close, you can still see that it's there, but it does so much in hiding how it did look. And so I'm going to go through and do this whole piece like this. Like all of the different pieces of leather, I'm going to go through and kind of cut and shape them. And then also I do want to demonstrate to you the difference between if you do the beveling first and then the texture. Over here, I'm going to do the texture first and then the beveling. Let me make sure I'm on camera. So you could just do just the texture with it angled onto the edge like that. Or you could come through. I'm going to start about the halfway point so we can compare. And again, make sure I'm in frame. And with layering tools like this, there truly is no right or wrong way to do it. So just here's some different effects that you can get with just the background. With the background covered with beveling, then the beveling covered with background. I personally like this one best. I think it shows off that gravelly texture a good bit more, but just some different options, effects you can get. And again, here's just with the bevel, and that's it without anything. So just some different effects that you can get with these two tools. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to do all of it the way that I'd like to. And then also, if you change your mind, you can also always just go back through, place your tool off camera, and then just pop it and get it to be however you like. So yeah, I'm going to go through and do this, and then I'll meet you all right back here for the next step. Okay, so I just did a bit that I thought I would share with you guys. I've been hammering away for quite a while now, and I'm starting to get a little tired. And sometimes what happens is your tooling will start to look a little wonky. See how that's a little wonky? That's okay, because we can fix that pretty easily. You just want to make sure that your tool placement, your weight isn't too far one way or the other, and that you aren't skewed off center. You want to be lined right up with that cut that we had done. And if you notice that it's like, oh man, that's not the way I want it to look, just go back. You can't control Z, but you can redo. And just kind of tap and move it along like that. So see how that helped even it out? So, I don't know, that's something I wish somebody told me I could do when I was starting. So I've gone ahead and done all the tooling, and my next step now is to mark out where my rivet placement is going to be for the decorative rivets. Now also, the decorative rivets, some of them will be functional, but I still want them to all be laid out nice and even. And on a piece like this piece here, where I'm going to be kind of split down the center, like for the back plate would be split down the center. For this one, this is the front plate, so I want it to be very nice and symmetrical. So I'm going to start just right here, and with my wing divider set at 1 inch, and I'm going to start from the middle and kind of grow out that way. So I'm going to do just a couple of marks in one direction, and then come through and do a couple of marks in the other. There we are. And then these shoulder pieces are actually going to be hidden. So I'm not too worried. Like, I could start here in the middle and be like, okay, well, I want nice equidistant points here in the center, and start here and build out that way, and then have the adjustment points be here on the shoulders. But I'm going to see how it looks just having it go equidistantly all the way around. And that way y'all can judge for yourselves how you'd rather go about it. Okay, so I'm coming around, and you can see I'm just eyeballing, trying to make sure that I'm not too far to one side or to the other side when I'm placing my mark. And if I am, then I'll just kind of adjust it a bit whenever I go through and punch the hole. The more practice you get, the more adept you'll become at just eyeballing it. Or the more confident you'll become that you absolutely have to have a ruler. Okay, so here you can see I'm overshooting quite a bit the halfway mark between the two. So I'm going to do a very light mark and then place in this hole and do a very light mark. And then I'm going to come and poke halfway in between those. So that's how I do that. And now I'm going to make sure to put my cutting board down. And I'm going to be using, you can't tell because it's kind of marked off, but it looks like, I think this is my 3/32. You want a hole punch that's going to make a hole that your rivets will fit snugly through it, but not so tight that you have to force it, and not so loose that it's not going to be supportive. Like I could go the size up, but I like this one for me. So it's personal preference, really. And then to make the holes, I'm just going to place it centered up if I can. You want to be consistent. If you're doing your hole placement, like your dot placement, and then lining your punch up with the edge of the punch onto the hole. Let me zoom in so you can get a much better idea of what I'm talking about. If you're lining your punch up with the edge of the hole, you'll want to line it up in the same spot on each one. I try to cover it in a way where it's centered, and you can actually press a bit and test and see where your hole placement would be. So I'm just going to set that right there and then try to figure out how to... I have my tripod down too low so I can't get a solid swing through. And just make sure that the hole punches all the way through nice and clean. You could use beeswax or Aussie wax on the tip to make it release a little easier. Just whatever your preference is. And also though, I'm going to wait to punch all of these until after I have stained and dyed it. Since these are all going to have rivets in them, I'm not worried about the inside of the hole being stained, but with the antique gel that I use, a whole lot of it gets kind of crammed up into these holes, and I feel like it's just a lot of work trying to get it cleaned out, and it makes it kind of gunky and unnecessary. So while that is how to punch the hole, I'm going to make the decision to wait to do that until after all the staining has been done. Okay, so I had actually forgotten to follow my pattern instructions and cut along the dotted line. So I went ahead and did the line, like normally I would have had my wing divider and done like a little section and had like it partitioned off, but this will work too. Now all my lines match up nice and even, but I do want to come through with this tool that is a little edge rounder. And you could just cut this by hand, but I have a really difficult time cutting in a way that is consistent. So I just like lining it up, making sure I'm not, you know, overcutting or undercutting one way or the other. And snip off. And again, this is exactly what I warned to watch out for. But whenever that happens, I just come through and snip it down flush. Whenever I slick my edges, that'll be all taken care of. But there we go. Get it placed. Whack a few times. And it just gives us a really nice rounded off edge. Corner, rather. Because I find that pointy little corners like this have a tendency to curl over the years of wear and tear. So by just rounding it off right from the get-go, we preemptively take care of that. So now the next step is going to be to decide which stain we want to use. But before I do that, I'm actually going to be cutting some straps. So I've done all the tooling on everything. I showed you how to punch a hole, but I decided I'm not going to do that just yet. And I've let all of the leather dry until, and this one, it looks much darker than the other one, but that's just because this part of the hide was exposed to sunlight and this one was not. So you can kind of see the way that they look. But now I'm going to go through and use a dark brown EcoFlow gel antique from Tandy Leather. Shaking it up really well. And it has a child safety lock, so you gotta get that open. And I'm going to be using this and some paper towels. So let me get a few sheets torn off in preparation. And from my way of doing the antique gel that I like to do, it's very important that you wear gloves. And then also, I do have a squirt bottle of water, like a spritzer. And so to apply the antique gel, you can see it's quite thick. And I'm just going to take this and slather it on and just rub it very generously all over the surface of our project. And so you can really see here why what was I going to say? Why I don't punch the little holes, because this antique gel would get down in all of those little holes and kind of just be a mess. So, kind of rubbing and buffing in. And then I am actually going to go ahead and do some on the back side. Now to make this stretch though, I'm going to do about half as much, and I'm going to swipe it on and then do a few sprays of water. And this is going to help dilute it because I don't need it to be nearly as concentrated on the back. But I do want a nice coverage of color, and this also lets me hook it onto the edges. What I mean by that is like just slide it off of my hands, scrape and rub, and it gives me a really nice finished edge. So I'm going to wipe a little bit of excess off my hands. And before this has an opportunity to penetrate too deeply, I'm going to do just a few sprays of water, and then I'm going to buff the surface. And then once your paper towel gets saturated with the antique gel, I'll want to fold around and use a fresh piece of paper towel, because otherwise it's just smearing the same stuff around instead of picking up some of the excess. And so you can see now this really has a wonderful effect of bringing out the lowlights and highlights of a piece. And you'll want to be careful because you can leave like little smudgy fingerprints. And so I just buff this up. If I missed any spots, I'll get some on a finger and just start kind of filling it in, because I really want a nice even coverage, especially whenever this is such a dark color to be using and the natural leather color is such a contrast to it. So I'm going to go through and do all of the pieces like this, and then I'll meet y'all right back here and we will begin the straps. So here you can see I have all of the straps cut out with the holes prepped, both for rivets and for just you know, putting the buckles together. And I'm going to show you guys on one of these. Before staining, I like to come through with my edge beveler. I'm going to zoom in so you can get a much better idea of what we're doing. And I'm just going to come through and slightly round off the edge here. It doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm only doing the front side because I want the edges where it folds around the belt buckle to be nice and flush together. And so now I'm going to be using the medium brown professional water stain by EcoFlow that I get from Tandy Leather. You want to make sure that it's nice and mixed up first. And it has this like child lock going on the top. So press down. I never quite figure it out. There we go. And I'm going to give myself a pretty liberal amount. And then I'm just using a high density sponge, complete with dog fur. And I'm super generous with this stuff. So I've just dipped the corner of my sponge in, and then I'm going to start applying. And I really want to make sure to get it down into this groove here. The other holes are going to be filled in with rivets, but this is going to be a bare edge when it's all said and done. And then I just go through, swipe it onto the edges, make sure it's all nice and covered, and then being just sopping wet in the stain, I'm going to set it off to the side, and then I would go through and stain all of my other straps in this same manner. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll meet y'all right back here. I'm using Aussie Wax by Phoebings. I'm not good at pronouncing words, but this is what it is. This is what I'm using. And I just have a piece of old denim here. I'm getting a little bit onto the cloth, and then you'll just buff it in. And this will act to seal and condition your leather. It helps it repel water, and it helps keep it clean. And I'll be doing this on both sides. And you can always add more, but you don't want to be too excessive with it. Because then you'll kind of end up with an oilier product. And you can actually go through and do this in a couple of different rounds too. So you could like do a layer, let it soak in, do a layer, let it soak in. And then we're actually going to be going through and using beeswax. As usual, all the tools and materials will be listed down below. And I'm just going to rub it on our edges. You can see how it kind of gooped up a bit. And I'm using a tool called an edge slicker that has some different sized grooves in it. And I'm just going to use this to slick in that beeswax, going up a size each time. And then also using the flat side of it to melt and slick that beeswax into the edge of our leather. So I'm going to go through and we're going to do that on all the edges, on all the pieces, including the little straps, and then I'll meet you all right back here. So now the next step for this piece of armor that I'm going to do is on all of these little dots that we've marked out with our ring divider, I'm going to go through and punch a hole using, I believe, again, it's rubbed off, but this is my 3/32 of an inch punch. And you can actually use beeswax to just get a little bit there on the tip, and that will help you to pull out the punch after you've hammered it into the leather. It's very important that you use a cutting mat, a quite thick cutting mat. This is 1/2 inch thick. That way you don't damage the tip of your punch. And we're just going to place it nice and centered up on our mark. A couple of solid whacks and pull it out. You want to make sure that you have clean punch all the way through. You don't want to just punch and still have, I mean, that didn't do anything. And it's hard to get it lined up perfectly a second time. So I'd rather be a little bit more solid with it than a little under solid, because that way it's still nice and clean on the back side as well. And so I'm just going to go through and continue to do this all the way around on this piece. But then we have a couple of other pieces, like for the shoulder armor, where this side is going to be exposed right up next to the neck, but then this piece is going to be overlaying, and so I'm not really going to bother doing any rivets on this side here. And I actually marked out, this one doesn't have the holes marked, whereas this one does, so this is actually going to be the top plate, because again, it's going to be covered. So between it being covered and between having a little bit of fur on the underside here, that would have been a waste of a good, 10 to 15 rivets. So that's how it'll start to come together. So we're going to go ahead and get all of these holes punched, and then we'll meet y'all right back here. So the next step for this project is we're going to be setting the rivets. Now, I'm using small and medium rivets here. Actually, I think these are extra small. But then they're called rapid rivets too, because they have this kind of unfinished backside. Some rivets will have where both sides look like the cap, but one will be a stem and one will be a cap. So you can kind of see. Also, if I remember to, hopefully there'll be a link coming up on the screen that takes you to a video where I go into much greater detail about setting rivets in leather. So I'm just going to place the stem up through the bottom of the leather. With regular rivets, it doesn't matter as much, but with the rapid rivets, I put the unfinished side on the side that I know is going to be the back side. And then we'll just put the little cap over it. I'm going to zoom in for you. There we are. And I'm going to place it, and sometimes it'll click, sometimes it'll just sit kind of loose over it. And I'm going to use a rivet setter, which you can see has a nice concave end and then a flat end. We're going to be hitting the flat end, so I'm going to set that down, and I'm just going to position this. They do have a size smaller of a rivet setter, but you don't have to have it. And then I'm just going to use our mallet and just give it a good few solid whacks. One of the benefits of using the smaller rivet setter is you won't have to worry about getting, see that little semicircle that it did around the rivet cap? So let me dig out if I can find it. Okay, so I couldn't find my small setter, but you can see it gets the job done. Has a nice flat, good connection on the back side. And then ideally, you won't have any wiggling or anything going on. You can kind of buff out that mark that it does around it, but really once it's in there, it's going to take a while for it to relax back out. So ideally, I'd have the smaller sized rivet setter, but I've looked high and low and it has vanished from the material realm. So I think I'm going to be investing in a new one. But I could also just fix that problem by using the next size cap up. This is a size cap that comes with the medium, large, and extra large rivets as compared to the small rivets, and then compared further still to the extra small rivets. So you can kind of see them, oops, next to each other. And these caps function very well interchangeably between the different lengths of rivets. Now, the times that you'll want to use the different lengths of rivets is dependent upon the thickness of leather that you're going through. So here I have 3 thicknesses of leather, and I only used a medium-sized rivet. And you can see the just going through one length. We could use this, but I'd have a much greater chance of the rivet failing. Whereas if I went through it with one of my small rivets, or extra small rather, sorry, it's much more size appropriate to the thickness of the leather, because there's just enough coming through that it'll still, whenever the rivet setter goes on there, it kind of mushrooms out inside the cap and holds everything together. And so you want enough that that can happen, but you don't want so much that it's going to, like, instead of compressing down, it'll like and go like sideways. And I don't know, just experiment if you're not too confident in a piece of scrap leather from the same project. It's worth the couple of pennies that you might spend on scrapped rivets than having to go through and kind of like torture out a rivet that's set improperly, which I do with wire snips. And I just get in there and kind of like just cut the rivet a bunch until it comes out. It mucks up the backside of the leather, and I try to avoid having to do it if I don't have to. So again, even with the medium rivet with a small, extra small cap, you could also be consistent about having that circle on there and just make it look like it's a design element. So people won't know that you didn't mean to do it if you do it every single time. So I'm going to go through and do all of this. I'm making sure that I have my D-ring placement taken care of first. For those of y'all who are following along with my digital download template through Patreon, or if you've purchased it from my Etsy store, I'm coming out to the 6th hole off the edge on both the front and the back for our D-rings. That's going to do the strap that goes underneath the arm around your rib cage. And then I think that's the only one that I'm doing so far. The rest of it, we can just set the rivets as we normally would. Except for here on the shoulders, you'll want to leave these two open because we're going to be attaching these two a little farther up. Like, we haven't established where the holes are yet. If you purchase my digital download pattern or get it through my Patreon, there will be a mark on there, but I haven't established where that mark is going to be yet. And then for this one, you're going to want to leave these two open. We can actually kind of establish, I'm going to come in 1, 2, 3 on the 3rd hole, and then 1, 2, 3 on the 3rd hole. And I might do it on the 4th hole in on each side. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I like how that sits, having it on the 4th hole. But you could decide for yourself how strong of a curve you want in it. If we went in just on the 3rd hole on each edge, that looks pretty sharp too. So I've changed my mind yet again. We're just going to do it here on the 3rd hole. So leave open the corner in the 3rd. And then that one here. Again, this will be marked on your pattern. Or you can decide for yourself where you'd like it. But we'll piece these two pieces together. I'll do all of these rivets first and then do those two. That way, whenever I have it assembled, I don't have to worry about fitting something in underneath these guys. So, if you wanted, you could take a, like, paper brad. One of those little things that looks like a rivet, but the thing splits open, and it would be like, I don't know, fold the ends open. You could place paper brads in there as a space holder to keep you from riveting in there, because I'm really bad about just riveting and then being like, oh crap, I needed that hole there. So you can use placeholders like that. You could put a little twist tie through it or a piece of scrap wire. I mean, just anything to get you to be like, hey, don't put a rivet here. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to do that mess of hammering a bunch of rivets, and then I'll meet you all right back here for the next step. I'm going to be adding some faux fur to the underside of the pauldrons. So I've come through, and you can see I've marked with a red Sharpie just kind of the lines, and then I'm going to be coming through with a very sharp craft knife. And be very careful to not cut yourself, but I don't want to use scissors because then it'll give me a very blunt chopped off edge. But if we come through, it can be kind of difficult at first because it's resistant to being cut. But I'm just going to come through holding one side this way and the other side kind of apart from each other. Very similar hand motion for me as seam ripping. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but we're just going to come through, and you can see as it cuts, it's not cutting any of our fur, so it's giving us a really nice, rough, natural edge. And I'm just going to come through and keep slicing along the entire length of our piece. Sorry, I just felt like yelling loudly in y'all's ear apparently. But no, it's I haven't measured at all, really. This is just the width of the scrap fabric that I have. So I'm coming through and just cutting along that whole length, and then I'll trim it kind of as needed. And then if I need to splice multiple pieces together, like of scrap, then I'll just join the ends together, making sure that the fur is growing the same way, and whip stitch along right there, nice and secure, because from the front side you won't really be able to tell. So if you cut smart, you won't have to worry about scrap so much. So I'm going to keep doing this, and then I'll meet you back here for the next step. For our next step, I'm coming through with my wing divider. And if you remember, we had the holes that we punched for the rivets at exactly 1 inch apart. And now I have the wing divider set to like 1 3/16 of an inch, just to be like super specific. But I'm coming through and marking on our fur, which I don't know if I pointed this out, but you want the grain of the fur all going one way, not this way, but like this way, perpendicular to where you're cutting. And so at the top edge of that, so that the fur looks like it's growing down, I'm coming through and positioning, giving myself about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I guess, coming in a 1/2 inch from the edge, and just marking with our Sharpie. There we go. And now I'm going to be coming through with an awl and opening up, being very careful not to stab myself. There we go. And you can actually come through with a smaller awl first and kind of build up to it, but it just kind of gets through the matting. You could also use a chisel or a hole punch, but I really kind of just liked doing it with the awl. Gives my arm a break from hammering things. And what this accomplishes by having the little bit of width difference is it's going to give us this very slight gather that you see here, how there's a little bit of puckering on each and every rivet, but it helped me to get that reduction that I needed to give us a really nice fur trim. And you can see right here where I skipped the 2 rivets for assembly. That hole's still there and still marked, but just how much space that little bit really adds up. And so to attach this, I would feed a rivet through, but again, we're skipping this first one. So I'm going to skip our first rivet and just feed through. Make sure the fur is trained down, kind of outward. We don't want it all bunched up underneath. And then I've just fed it through right there on our project. And then we will place a cap and hammer it. Just like that. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to do this whole edge. And also, not just whenever it's curved outward, but whenever it's convex or concave, I don't know. Whenever it's curved in ways like this, that little bit of gather there will give us enough that it'll spread out and be quite nice. It allows for the shape changes. Words are hard. I'm going to keep doing this, and I'm going to do all of the fur first before assembling the different pieces together. So I'm going to complete that, and then I'll meet you guys right back here. Okay, so now that we have all of our fur attached, it's time to start assembling the pieces. And I'm going to come through using one of the large rapid rivets, and I'm going to make sure that my fur is kind of splayed out so that it's not just all going off into one direction. And I'm just going to feed it through, and then through that first hole. And then we're going to come around to not this topmost hole, but this one here. And I'm going to feed it through the fur, and then through the leather. And then I'm going to place it down onto my nice hard surface. Place a cap that matches the others. And then using the curved side of our rivet setter, just placing and giving it a nice solid point of attachment. And now we're going to do that same thing on the other side, feeding through the hole in the fur, making sure it's all radiated out, just kind of fluffed nice, and then coming through to that third rivet spot, feeding through the fur and feeding through the rivet. Now we're going to have a little bit of like a weird bend going on. That's normal. That lends itself to the way that the pauldrons will naturally lay when they're being worn. Place the rivet cap, hammer the heck out of it, and now we can actually take this, and I'm grabbing the two separate layers and rotating it down just a bit. And so now whenever it's curved around, it's going to give us that really nice scaled effect. And then I would take the next piece in the pattern, bend it around, and I think I'm actually going to punch a hole here and a hole here, but that's too far over. So I actually think there and there might be nice. So yeah, in the pattern I'll have established where this hole's going to be, so you'll actually be having an easier time than I am currently. Just follow along with where the hole placement is, or change it however suits you. I think we're just going to do there and there. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to come in with my awl, kind of equidistant between these two, so right there, and then equidistant between these two, so right there. Using my hole punch, punch those two holes. And now I'm going to feed my rivet, my large rapid rivet, up through the back. And then place both layers of the fur that meet together up here at the shoulder. And you can follow along with this pattern and not do the layers of fur. I just wanted to show you guys for in case you did want that. Yeah, make sure that the little rivet stem is showing through, and then place our leather. Place the rivet cap, nice and secure. Whack the heck out of it. And then we're going to do the same thing over here on that other side. Now, your rivet can be completely set, but you'll still experience some hinging. That's completely normal. That's actually what we're going for here. Push the rivet in. And the fur definitely helps in buffering that. And so, place one layer of the fur, then the other layer of the fur. Can be kind of hard sometimes to find the little holes that we mark, but if you persevere, I believe in you, we can do this. Okay, now placing the leather over, placing a rivet cap, and whacking the heck out of it. There we are. So now we can fluff the leather out, or the fur out rather, and bend it around, and there is our shoulder piece. That does have the option that it can come down a little further if you wanted, but I like the way it looks, kind of up a bit. So there we go. And then we're going to do the same thing to the other side, and then we're going to start attaching the buckles. So we have both of the shoulder pieces assembled, and now it is time to start applying the buckles. Again, on your pattern there should already be holes marked out, but if you were devising your own pattern or modifying it, I like to have the buckles lined up. This one, there's not really going to be any room for it to overlap, so I have it on the smallest setting. I want the buckle to be lined up with this middle part, because then regardless of how far you spread it apart, the buckle will still be kind of floating over it, if that makes sense. And so we get everything lined up, placing the buckles to make sure they're kind of nicely placed words, and then using my awl to just mark the end here, and then I'm actually just going to lift up the tail here and mark there as well. So that one's marked. And then this one's marked. And so now, those are our holes to punch, and this will get riveted there. And then I'm going to be putting a small decorative rivet here on the end on both of the adjusters. And then for this side, making sure that the tongue of the belt is going the correct way, I'm going to do one rivet through these two, and then one rivet through this layer and these. That way it'll sit, still allows for a little bit of swivel, but everything will be nice and secure. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that in time lapse. I'm going to assemble all the buckles, but just follow along with the pattern with where the holes are marked, or again, like I had said, devise your own placement. And then we'll meet you guys back here with, I think this is the last step. so I got everything assembled. And really, I should have done 2 buckles, like 2 smaller ones, because now I have this major swivel problem. But I am going to fix that on this piece by adding a rivet here and here, just to get this to keep happening in line with the neckline. So I'm just going to come in and I want to do the rivet right here. And so I've got it and I'm whack the crap out of it. And then I'm going to come up to underneath right here. And it's important to go ahead and do the 2 rivets, because if I just did 1, I'd still be having a swivel problem. So it's better to just go ahead and do it. And so I'm going to, now these buckles, even after it's been riveted, will serve the purpose of attaching cloaks too. So they're not completely useless, is how I'm trying to tell myself that this has been salvaged. But I'm going to make sure too that this is, I want to make absolute certain that this is equidistant. Yep, equidistant, okay. So keeping that where, yep, measure twice, cut once kind of thing. And so this can be modified to fit, you know, size these pieces to get you to fit however you like. That way you don't need it to be as completely adjustable here on the shoulders, but that does give you a spot that you could open this up and put through like a ring with cloaks or something, or like, I don't know. That, and I personally, yeah, quiver of arrows is a good idea, but I like the way buckles look, so I don't mind them being on there for decorative purposes. Okay, so now I've got my rivets. And I've removed my cutting board because I like the nice flat surface of the marble. And I'm just going to come in from the underside, kind of filling around. There we go, it came through. And then, oops, bumped my head on the camera. Feed that rivet right through the top there. And then I'm going to use some of these caps, just because I've run out of big caps. Right, there's my rivet setter. Place and hammer. And so I'm going to go through and continue doing these rivets on the other shoulder and then also on the back side. And then I'll meet you guys here for the last step. Hey y'all, so this is how the armor came together after it's all been said and done. It's sitting kind of high up on the mannequin, but and my stand's not standing very well. But you can see just the way it kind of sits really helped to set those 2 rivets, but we do still have these buckles for attaching cloaks or anything else that a person might want to add. I'm sure this template will keep evolving. If you are interested in my templates, I have them for sale on Etsy, which there'll be links down below. And then I also have them available for digital download content on my $10 and up Patreon tiers. Where I try to update it weekly, at least once a month, with a bunch of new content that you can use for your own, you know, make stuff out of it, sell it at your store, sell it on your Etsy, sell it on you know, wherever. Not the templates, but the stuff that you make from the templates. And, but yeah, so if you guys have any questions, comments, or ideas, you know I love hearing from you. Yeah, just leave a comment down below. You can also contact me on my business Facebook page. I've had a lot of people comment and be like, why haven't you replied to me? And because you were sending me messages on my personal Facebook, and I don't have Facebook Messenger on my phone. It just, something goes wrong every time and it makes my phone crash, but I can answer your messages through my Back to Earth Creations page. Then you can also tag, like, post stuff to my wall, and you can tag me on Instagram is another great way of getting hold of me. And then also, if you enjoy my free tutorials and would like to support the creation of more of them, please go over and check me out on Patreon. You don't even have to be a pledger to see some of the exclusive stuff that I post over there, but then also if you pledge $1 or more, it signs you up for all of my different giveaways and like craft crates and digital download content and all sorts of stuff that we do here at Back to Earth Creations. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, and I do hope that this video was helpful to y'all, but I'll see y'all next time. So happy crafting. Bye.